Good morning, everybody. Just checking what's happening outside. There's a racket. Something's happening with the dog. Um, how you doing? Monday. Here we go. Monday. Excellent stuff. I love a Monday, as well you know. 9 o'clock, Monday the 16th of August. Hope you've had a good weekend. I had a very productive weekend. Got lots done. Made little boxes and cleaned things. Did all sorts of stuff. Um, Leave it until the last minute. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Quite. Are you a last minuter? There are many people who are, either by choice, because people, when I talk about this, people will say to me, "Oh, but I just do my best work when I'm under pressure." No, you don't. Or I like to have a deadline. That people say these kind of things. I like to have a deadline, and I like to be right up against it, and it motivates me. Well, it does. It does. Because when time is scarce, it forces you to focus, doesn't it? How about you try to focus when time is not scarce? That's the secret. But yes, it does. It does. People who say, "Yeah, I get things done at the last minute," and they possibly do. My question always is it your best work? And you best make sure that there are three things that you've got in place before you do things at the last minute. The first is, have you allocated enough time? Have you allocated enough time to the task that you've got to do? Do you have everything? Are you confident you have everything to hand that you're going to need? And are you confident that nothing else is going to happen to derail you? Because doing things at the last minute is fine until it's not fine. That's the problem, isn't it? Like with a lot of things, as long as everything goes well, everything is going to be fine. But when things don't, so let's just unpick those three things. Make sure you've allocated yourself enough time. You probably figure by now that I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to suggest to you that doing things at the last minute is not a good idea. Make sure you set aside yourself enough time. You probably won't have. This is one of the problems. There's a thing called the planning fallacy that I often talk about, which says it's a psychological problem that we have in our heads, and it says that we tend to um, we tend to allocate too little time to longer tasks. We underestimate how long longer tasks will take, because at best, we tend to think of an average amount of time that a particular task would take. At worst, we remember times when it went well. So if you've got a task that takes a couple of hours, if you think will take a couple of hours to do, instinctively, it's probably going to take you longer, or could potentially take you longer, because as you know, when you sit down to do something, sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't go well. One of the problems is often the second thing that I'm going to talk about. But the first thing is this enough time thing. Sometimes we don't allocate enough time to something, because it's a bit more complex this time. There are more hurdles to get over this time to get the task complete. You may be writing a report, or if you're a student, you're writing an assignment, and it usually takes you, you've left yourself 3 hours on the night it's due in to kind of finish off and tidy it up, and you usually manage to get it done in that time. But this time you go back to that assignment and you realize that you've missed one of the learning outcomes, and all of a sudden it's all gone pear-shaped, hasn't it? So we tend to underestimate the length of time it takes us to do long tasks. We overestimate how long it takes us to do short tasks, but that's a whole other ball game. So the thing is, set aside more time than you instinctively feel you will need. Um, and it's great if you do this routinely. You keep finding little pockets of time in your calendar when you can kind of pick up and do other things, because if you instinctively feel something's going to take you a couple of hours, and you allocate 2.5 hours to it because of this planning fallacy kind of myth that occurs, and it does take the 2 hours, then suddenly you've got half an hour back when you can pick up some other shorter, smaller tasks. tick some things off that list of things you're going to do when you know time allows. You could do some of those things, or get ahead of the game and start on your next task sooner. So there are all sorts of advantages to that. And even if it takes you longer than the 2.5 hours, takes you 2 3/4 hours, then it's actually only taking you 1/4 of an hour longer than the time you set aside, rather than 3/4 of an hour. So there are all sorts of reasons to kind of do that. The second thing is, have you got everything to hand that you need for the task? I don't know about you, but I can often, or used to anyway, less so now, but it still happens. I can start a task and you get halfway through and you think, oh, I need this thing, or I need that thing, I needed to speak to this person in order to do this bit, or I needed this information to hand to finish off this element of the task. So if you're going to leave things till the last minute, you need to not only have made sure you've allocated sufficient time, but you need to make sure you've got everything available to you. Because if you've set yourself 2 hours aside for the task and suddenly you start to think, oh, I need that, and you have to go off and get that, you've suddenly added 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour into the time it's taken. And I tell you where I see this the most, and you ponder these things when you become a lecturer and you have to mark people's work, which is it's an interesting thing to have to do. It's not a thing I'm hugely comfortable with, but you know, there it goes. It's part of the job. So you see it in assignments often, where students have written sections or left it till the last minute, and suddenly they think, oh, I need a reference for this section. And instead of it being out of a book or a journal or something, it's off the internet, and it's off some dodgy site that they probably shouldn't have been using, you know, to in academic work anyway. They probably shouldn't have been using, and it knocks their marks and that kind of thing. And I've had tutorials afterwards when I've taught the students, particularly students whose work you've marked over a period of the 3 years that they're with us, and you know the quality of their work usually, and you can spot it, and you say to them, I think you wrote this at the last minute, and invariably they go, yeah, I did, because you can spot when people have. So doing something at the last minute, not having everything to hand that you need, not leaving yourself enough time, means that what happens is you either the quantity suffers, you don't get as much done, and you've somehow got to wangle an extra day out of it, or the quality suffers, it's just not as good. That's why I think you don't do your best work when you leave things to the last minute, because invariably you don't set aside enough time, and invariably you don't have everything at hand that you need, because it's really hard to predict 100% what you need. So, you know, make sure you have everything to hand that you need. So that involves your planning, doesn't it? Making sure for every task you've got to hand what you need. And of course, the secret is to buy yourself loads more time, by setting yourself an artificial target. So if the target thing is like this Friday, then set yourself the target of the end of today or last Friday, and then suddenly you've got room for those kind of slippage things, you know. Now, this is hard work when you first try to do it, because you're trying to pull everything forward. I remember I set myself the task of bringing everything, of working ahead for 2 months, and making sure that I was always 2 months ahead. And I'm never almost 2 months ahead, but that's what I try and achieve all the time. So getting 2 months ahead for the first time was hard work, and I worked some late nights and I worked some weekends to get 2 months ahead. But once you're 2 months ahead, that really kind of frees up time, because you can start thinking, I'll get onto that thing that's due in a few weeks, I'll get onto that now, and you're working ahead all the time. And often, if I've had a busy period at work, that 2 months ahead slips down to kind of 2 or 3 weeks ahead, and then I try and build it back up again. So working ahead all the time is good. But back to last minuters. So make sure if you're going to do it at the last minute, but don't, make sure you've allocated enough time. Make sure you have everything you need to hand, and that's your planning. So you know my rule. This Friday is the most important day of next week. So you're planning next week on the Friday before, and then you're planning every day. At the end of every day, planning tomorrow should be fairly straightforward, because you've already kind of mapped it out the previous week. So you should just be kind of replanning things if something's changed, or planning in new things, and just checking the other things to make sure you've got everything at hand. And the other thing that you need to control, if you're going to leave something till the last minute, is making sure that nothing else is going to happen. And here's the deal: you can't control nothing else happening. It's impossible, because there are so many factors out there in your working life and in your family life, that you can't control everything, and you can bet your bottom dollar if you leave something till the last minute, something will happen when you've only got that 2 hours left to do that task. So don't do it. Don't do it. But for all of your tasks, allocate enough time. Remember the planning fallacy, so allocate a bit more time than you instinctively feel as though you need. Make sure the day before or the week before that when you hit that task, you've got everything you need for that task, so that if something does happen, you're ahead of the game anyway, because you've given yourself enough time and you've brought your end date for the task forward to an artificial point that you've established rather than the actual date. So I still believe that doing things at the last minute does provide focus and does provide motivation, but it comes at a huge risk. So don't do it. Unless you absolutely really have to. Don't do it. There you go. That's my thing for Monday. Have good weeks. We'll check in. We'll check in as the week goes on. See you soon.